Every morning I stepped onto campus with a head held high and a smile that could disarm anyone. To the world, I was just another ambitious student thriving in the chaos of university life. Students lounged on the sprawling green lawns. Professors scurried between buildings clutching stacks of papers, and the buzz of youthful ambition resonated through every corridor. I was Emily Carter, the girl who could hold her own in debates, ace every test, and light up a room with her presence. My grades were impeccable, my social life enviable, and my future seemingly limitless. But beneath this carefully curated facade, a storm brewed. For 3 years, I had carried a secret that twisted around my soul like a vice. At 21, I was living with the cold reality of being HIV positive. 3 years of suffocating under a truth that I shared with no one. It all began with Ryan, a man who entered my life when I was 18. He was older, sophisticated, and exuded a charm that made me feel seen in ways I hadn't before. At a time when I was still discovering myself, Ryan was the sun, and I orbited around him. Ryan showered me with affection, promises of a future, and a love that felt all-consuming. But hidden in the shadows of his charm were the red flags I was too naive, or perhaps too entranced, to see. He would dismiss my questions about his past, evade conversations that hinted at deeper truths. But when you're young and in love, you choose to believe in the fantasy. Months into our relationship, things began to unravel. I fell sick, constantly fatigued with fevers that wouldn't break. A routine doctor's visit shattered my world. "You're HIV positive," the doctor said, her tone steady but weighted. I froze, my mind unable to grasp the words. HIV? At 18? It felt impossible, unfair, like the world had conspired against me. Confronting Ryan was the next logical step. I went to him, trembling, seeking solace, answers, anything to make sense of my new reality. But his response was colder than I could have imagined. He shrugged. "I didn't think it mattered," he said, as though he'd spilled coffee on a tablecloth. "Not shattered my life." That moment changed me in ways I couldn't comprehend at the time. The betrayal hit harder than the diagnosis itself. For months I spiraled, grappling with a cocktail of emotions, anger, shame, despair. The stigma of my condition felt like a chain, tightening around my throat, suffocating me in silence. But in that silence, something else began to grow, a bitterness that slowly hardened into resolve. Ryan's betrayal had rewritten the trajectory of my life, and in my darkest hours, a whisper of an idea began to take shape. They're all the same, I told myself. Men like Ryan, who took without care, manipulated without consequence, and left behind destruction, deserved retribution. The thought was a flicker at first, something abstract and distant. But as days turned into months, it grew sharper, more defined, until it became a plan I could no longer ignore. The first time was almost accidental. It was at a party, with a guy whose arrogance was matched only by his charm. He assumed I'd go home with him, and I let him believe it was his idea. As we kissed, the power I felt was unlike anything I'd known before. Afterward, I didn't feel guilt, just an odd sense of justice. He didn't know what was coming, but I did. From there, it became easier. I sought out men who reminded me of Ryan, men who treated women as objects, trophies, or conquests, professors who flirted with their students, classmates who boasted about their conquests. Each encounter became part of a meticulous record I kept in a journal. The journal started as a coping mechanism, a way to process my emotions, but it quickly evolved into something else. Each entry detailed the men I targeted, how I lured them in, and how they trusted me without question. Every entry ended the same way. Now you know what betrayal feels like. To the world, I was still Emily Carter, the charismatic, driven student everyone admired. But at night, in the solitude of my dorm room, I confronted the weight of my double life. It all came crashing down the evening my childhood friend, Lily, came to visit unannounced. Lily had always been my anchor, the friend who saw through my bravado when no one else could. We had drifted apart since college started, but her presence in my life had always felt like a tether to my past self. The Emily I used to be before Ryan, before the secret, before the bitterness consumed me. That night, she knocked on my dorm room door, her cheerful voice cutting through the weight I carried inside. "Surprise. Thought I'd drop by since you're always too busy to call," she said, stepping in with the casual confidence of someone who belonged. I forced a smile, masking the unease that churned in my stomach. Lily had a knack for peeling back my layers, and tonight, I wasn't ready for her to see the truth lurking underneath. As she sat on my bed, her laughter filling the room with memories of simpler times, my journal lay forgotten on the desk, open, its damning contents exposed. It happened in an instant. Lily reached over, her curiosity piqued by the notebook's neat handwriting. "What's this?" she asked, flipping the saping through the pages before I could stop her. Her face paled. The color drained from her cheeks as her eyes scanned the words, the names, the details, the cold, calculated entries. "Emily, what is this?" she whispered, her voice trembling. I froze. The air between us thickened, suffocating. No words came to my lips, no excuses that could erase what she had just seen. My silence was all the confirmation she needed. Lily slammed the journal shut, her eyes brimming with tears. "This isn't you," she said, her voice breaking. "I don't know who you are anymore. But this isn't the Emily I grew up with." Her words hit me like a tidal wave. For so long I had justified my actions as a twisted form of justice, a way to reclaim control. But hearing Lily's voice crack under the weight of her disbelief shattered the narrative I'd clung to. Days later, the campus was thrown into chaos. A professor, one of my targets, revealed during a faculty meeting that he had tested positive for HIV. His announcement sent shockwaves through the university, triggering panic and speculation. I watched from the sidelines as fear spread like wildfire. Students whispered in hushed tones, their faces pale with unease. Social media exploded with rumors, fingers pointing in every direction. In the pit of my stomach, I felt the walls of my carefully constructed life begin to crumble. That night, alone in my room, I stared at the journal. The pages that once felt like trophies now felt like shackles, binding me to a darkness I could no longer ignore. I thought of Lily's words, of the professor's anguished face, of the countless lives I had affected with my bitterness. For the first time in years, the guilt became unbearable. Guilt is a peculiar thing. It doesn't just sit with you, it grows, festers, and gnaws at the edges of your sanity until there's no escape. That night, as the weight of my actions pressed down on me, I realized I couldn't run anymore. By morning, I knew what I had to do. It wasn't enough to stop. I had to confront the truth head-on. Sitting at my desk, I opened my laptop and began to type. The words came haltingly at first, each keystroke like a blade dragging across my soul. But once I started, I couldn't stop. I wrote about Ryan, about the betrayal that had shattered my world and the darkness it had awakened in me. I detailed the anger that consumed me, the revenge I sought, and the lives I had knowingly harmed. "I am Emily Carter," I wrote, my hands trembling, "and I have harmed 86 men, knowingly infecting them with HIV. I thought I was taking control, but I see now that I became the very monster I despised." With a deep breath, I posted the confession anonymously on a popular campus forum. It felt like releasing a scream into a void. For a few hours, there was silence. Then the void screamed back. The confession went viral. Within a day, it was on every social media platform shared by students, professors, and even strangers who had no connection to the university. The responses were a whirlwind of emotions: rage, disgust, shock, pity. Some called for my immediate arrest, while others tried to understand the broken person behind the screen. It didn't take long for the authorities to trace the post back to me. My arrest was swift and public. As I was led away in handcuffs, the media descended like vultures, cameras flashing, reporters shouting questions. My name and face were plastered across every screen, every headline. Emily Carter, the campus predator. The woman who weaponized HIV. Each headline was a nail in the coffin of the life I had built. People who once greeted me warmly now crossed the street to avoid me. Online, I became the target of hate, threats, and relentless scrutiny. For the first time in years, I felt completely exposed, stripped of the mask I had worn for so long. The courtroom was cold, both in temperature and atmosphere. Rows of faces stared at me, my victims, their families, students, reporters. Their expressions ranged from anger to sorrow, but most of all they burned with betrayal. When it was my turn to speak, I stood before the judge, my knees trembling. The weight of my actions bore down on me like 1,000 bricks. "Your Honor," I began, my voice shaking. "I know. There's nothing I can say to undo the pain I've caused. I stand here today not to ask for forgiveness, but to take responsibility." I spoke of Ryan, of the betrayal that had planted the seed of anger in me, and the choices I made to let that anger consume me. I admitted that I had allowed my pain to define me, to justify actions that were unforgivable. "I became the very monster I despised," I said, my voice breaking, "and for that I am deeply sorry." Some in the audience wept, others glared at me with unbridled hatred, but a very few, looked at me with something resembling understanding. When the sentencing was announced, the courtroom was silent save for the faint rustle of papers and the heavy breath of anticipation. "You are both a victim and a perpetrator," the judge said, her voice firm but not unkind. "Your actions are inexcusable, but they are also a reflection of pain that was never addressed. Your path to redemption lies in acknowledging both truths and using your story to educate others about the consequences of unchecked anger and betrayal." I was spared prison. Instead, I was sentenced to an intensive rehabilitation program and 2,000 hours of community service. The judge emphasized that my punishment was not just about atonement, but also about creating awareness, a way to prevent others from walking the path I had taken. As I stood there, the gavel echoing in my ears, I felt a strange mix of relief and dread. The road ahead was uncertain, but for the first time, I was forced to confront the consequences of my actions in a way I couldn't ignore. The months that followed were grueling. My life, as I knew it, had been obliterated, leaving behind the wreckage of my choices. I joined an HIV awareness campaign as part of my sentence, traveling to schools, universities, and community centers to share my story. At first, standing in front of an audience felt unbearable. Every pair of eyes a reminder of the shame I carried. But, as I spoke, something began to shift. In the audience, I saw faces soften with understanding, students leaning forward to absorb every word. Some approached me after my talks, thanking me for opening their eyes to the stigma and realities of living with HIV. For the first time in years, I felt like my pain served a purpose beyond destruction. Counseling became another cornerstone of my journey. I sat across from therapists who pushed me to unravel the layers of anger and bitterness I had buried deep within. For the first time, I allowed myself to truly grieve, for the life I had before Ryan, for the trust he shattered, for the person I became because of it. Forgiving Ryan was the hardest part, but I learned that forgiveness wasn't about excusing what he did. It was about releasing the grip he still had on my life. Holding on to that anger had only poisoned me further, and letting it go was the first step toward healing. Rebuilding my relationships was another uphill battle. My family, who had distanced themselves as the scandal unfolded, began to re-enter my life cautiously. At first, there were awkward silences, unspoken judgments hanging in the air. But over time, we found our way back to each other. My parents, though struggling to understand, expressed quiet pride in my efforts to make amends. Lily, my childhood friend, became my anchor once again. She had been the first to confront me, to force me to see the truth of what I had become. Now, she stood by me as I pieced my life back together, her unwavering presence a reminder that redemption, though painful, was possible. Volunteering at clinics and support groups became another outlet for my redemption. I met others living with HIV, people from all walks of life, each carrying their own stories of pain and resilience. Helping them navigate the stigma and challenges felt like penance. Each interaction reminded me that my story, as dark as it was, could still serve a purpose. But redemption is not a destination. There are days when the guilt still gnaws at me, when I see the faces of my victims in my dreams or hear their voices in my mind. The weight of my past is a constant companion, a reminder of the harm I caused and the lives I changed forever. Yet there are also moments of hope, moments when a student thanks me for opening their eyes, or when a victim tells me they've found a way to move forward. Moments when I look in the mirror and see not just the person I was, but the person I'm trying to become. My story sparked conversations I never imagined. People debated the nature of forgiveness, the consequences of unchecked pain, and the capacity for change. Some believed I deserved harsher punishment, that no amount of community service could atone for the lives I had affected. Others saw me as a cautionary tale, a reminder of the destructive power of unresolved trauma. I don't know if I'll ever fully atone for what I've done, but I've learned that the first step is choosing to face the truth no matter how painful it may be. And the scars of my past remain both visible and invisible. They are reminders of the lessons I've learned, the growth I've achieved, and the lives I can still touch. I am not the person I was 3 years ago, or even 1 year ago. I am a work in progress, a story still being written. Though I can never undo the harm I caused, I choose every day to honor the second chance I've been given. By helping others, by breaking free from the chains of anger and regret, I hope to create light where there was once only darkness. It's not an easy path, but it is the only one worth walking.